Before we get into the video, could everyone please subscribe to my HOA Karen Tales channel? Thank you so much. Scene opens at night. A massive 20-feet inflatable Godzilla towers over a quiet suburban cul-de-sac, illuminated by a flickering street lamp. HOA Karen, in her robe and slippers, stands frozen on her lawn, clutching her chest in sheer horror. Suddenly, the sprinklers activate, drenching her as she lets out an ear-piercing scream. The camera cuts to a Ring doorbell feed, me doubled over in laughter. I bet you're wondering how we got here. My voice narrates over the footage. Well, it all started when Karen stole my flamingos. Smash cut to a bright sunny morning in my front yard before the chaos. A neat row of plastic pink flamingos stands proudly on my lawn, a harmless bit of decoration, a personal touch of fun in a neighborhood that takes itself way too seriously. My name's Jake, just an average guy who moved into this HOA-governed neighborhood a year ago. I kept my head down, paid my dues, mowed my lawn. Nothing crazy until Karen. Karen, the self-appointed dictator of the HOA, had a personal vendetta against anything remotely unapproved in our quiet, cookie-cutter suburb. She had already bullied the Johnsons into removing their wind chimes, made the Petersons repaint their front door twice, and single-handedly waged war on patio furniture that clashed with the aesthetic. But I didn't care about any of that until the day I walked outside to find my flamingos missing. At first, I thought it was a prank, maybe some neighborhood kids messing around. But then I checked the security footage. There she was in broad daylight, marching across my lawn like she owned the place, plucking each flamingo out of the ground with the grim efficiency of a serial killer disposing of evidence. No hesitation, no guilt, just a smug little smirk as she dumped them into a black trash bag and strutted away like she had done the neighborhood some great public service. I was fuming, but I wasn't about to start a war over a few plastic birds. I figured I'd knock on her door, ask for them back, and be done with it. Big mistake. Karen answered the door with that same smug expression. Before I could even finish my sentence, she hit me with a printed-out HOA violation notice, stating that my flamingos were in clear violation of community decorum and had been confiscated per HOA guidelines. Confiscated? Since when was she the flamingo police? I pointed out that other houses had decorations, wreaths, garden gnomes, even a wooden bear statue on Mr. Thompson's lawn, but she just smiled. Those are tasteful. Your flamingos were an eyesore. She shut the door in my face. That should have been the end of it. I could have let it go, but Karen had underestimated just how petty I could be. The next morning, I replaced my missing flamingos with 20 more, bigger, brighter, some wearing sunglasses, a couple decked out in tiny Hawaiian lace. That night, I watched my security feed with a bucket of popcorn as Karen stormed onto my lawn, frothing with rage. She yanked them out one by one, muttering under her breath. I was hurling them into a garbage bag like a lunatic. I laughed. This was too easy. So I escalated. The next day, I set up a full flamingo army, 40 of them, all perfectly aligned in military formation. I even rigged a couple to rotate with the wind so they always faced Karen's house, like they were watching her. Karen lost it. The next morning, I woke up to a thick, official-looking HOA notice taped to my door. A $500 fine for repeat violations. I checked my cameras. She called in reinforcements. This time, it wasn't just her. An actual HOA committee had shown up in the dead of night, clipboard in hand, marching onto my property like a SWAT team, seizing flamingos left and right. Okay, game on. I wasn't about to let some HOA tyrant bully me into submission. But I had no idea that things were about to spiral way out of control. I wasn't about to let some overzealous HOA tyrant bully me into submission. Karen thought she had one, but what she didn't realize was that she had just declared war, and I don't lose wars. The next morning, I set my plan in motion. I went to the store and bought 50 more flamingos. Not just any flamingos. These were LED-lit, solar-powered, color-changing flamingos that would glow neon pink at night. I arranged them in perfect military formation once again, each one standing guard over my lawn like a disciplined soldier. And then, to really get under Karen's skin, I installed a motion-activated speaker hidden in a bush. Every time someone walked by, it played a flamingo sound effect, an obnoxious, high-pitched bird call that echoed through the cul-de-sac. I went to bed that night, eagerly waiting for the chaos to unfold. At exactly 2:47 a.m., my security cameras captured the moment Karen, armed with a flashlight and what appeared to be gardening gloves, crept onto my lawn like a burglar. She took one step forward, and the motion-activated sound blared at full volume. Karen jumped so hard she dropped her flashlight. For a second, she stood there, frozen in panic, before frantically grabbing the first flamingo she could reach. Then the sprinklers activated. A shriek echoed through the night as Karen got blasted by freezing water, slipping on the wet grass and falling face first into the mud. I was watching the whole thing live on my phone, laughing so hard I could barely breathe. But Karen wasn't done. She crawled forward, soaked in furious determination, yanking out flamingos with pure rage. By morning, my lawn was bare again. All 50 flamingos were gone. I stepped outside to find a new HOA violation notice taped to my door. This time, it wasn't just a fine, it was a formal warning. Continued non-compliance will result in further disciplinary action. Karen had officially escalated this from a petty back and forth to an all-out neighborhood dictatorship. But I still had one trick up my sleeve. The next day, I filed a counter-complaint. If my flamingos violated HOA rules, then so did Karen's tacky garden gnomes. I emailed the HOA board attaching dozens of photos of Karen's entirely unapproved lawn decorations. Gnomes, a spinning sun catcher, even a decorative stone turtle that, according to the HOA guidelines, exceeded the approved height for yard ornaments. 2 days later, Karen woke up to a notice on her door. Her gnomes gone. The moment she saw them missing, she stormed out onto the street, demanding to know who was responsible. When she found out it was me, she snapped. That afternoon, HOA enforcers showed up at my door. Not just some angry letter, actual HOA board members. One of them, a man in an ill-fitting polo, handed me an official HOA violation letter. "This is your final warning," he said in the most dramatic voice possible. "Failure to comply will result in the revocation of your lawn privileges." I blinked. "What lawn privileges?" He repeated. "The HOA reserves the right to temporarily take over the maintenance of your lawn should you fail to uphold community standards." "You're saying," I clarified, "that if I don't comply, you're going to take control of my own yard?" "That is correct." I stared at him. "And you don't think that's insane?" He cleared his throat. "The HOA exists to maintain harmony." I bit my tongue to keep from laughing. They were actually serious. Karen stood a few feet away, watching with the smuggest expression I had ever seen. I wanted to fight back right then and there, but I realized this wasn't just Karen's power play. This was the entire HOA ganging up on me. I needed a new plan, and I needed allies. That evening, I got an unexpected knock on my door. It was Mr. Thompson, my next-door neighbor, a quiet, retired guy who usually kept to himself. "You got a second?" he asked. I invited him in. He sat down, sighed heavily, and leaned forward. "You're not the first one Karen's done this to," he said. That's when I found out Karen had been terrorizing the neighborhood for years. She had personally fined the Johnsons over their bird feeder. She forced the Martinez family to repaint their house after deciding their original color was too bold. She had even banned Christmas lights last year because she thought they looked tacky. And now she had crossed the line one too many times. "We're tired of it," Thompson said, "and we think it's time someone did something about it." I raised an eyebrow. "We?" He smirked. Turns out there was an entire secret resistance movement inside the neighborhood. Homeowners who had been silently suffering under Karen's reign of terror. And now, thanks to my flamingo fiasco, they were ready to fight back. I leaned forward. "What are you suggesting?" "We take the war to her," he said. Together. A slow grin spread across my face. Karen had just united the entire neighborhood against her. She had no idea what was coming next. That night, the neighborhood resistance was born. I sat in my living room with Mr. Thompson, the quiet but calculating retired neighbor who had just revealed that I wasn't the only victim of Karen's HOA dictatorship. He wasn't alone. The neighbors had shown up, each with their own horror story about Karen's reign of terror. There was Lisa, a single mom who had been fined $200 because her kid left his bike on the driveway for too long. Mike and Sharon, a couple, had their backyard string lights forcibly removed because Karen thought they looked like a circus. And then there was Paul, a military vet who had a flagpole violation. The HOA had tried to force him to take down an American flag because it didn't meet their exact specifications. Karen had pissed off the wrong people. "She's been getting away with this for years," Mr. Thompson said, pouring himself a glass of whiskey like we were in some kind of underground resistance meeting. "But now she's finally made a mistake." I leaned forward. "So what's the plan?" Phase 1. Psychological warfare. The key to beating Karen wasn't just annoying her. It was outsmarting her. We started small. That week, every single house on the block slyly rebelled. Lisa parked her kid's bike in her driveway every day, just for a few minutes at a time, just long enough for Karen to notice. Mike and Sharon put up fairy lights inside their window, not on their backyard fence. Paul raised an even bigger flag, just slightly within regulation, but with spotlights illuminating it at night. Karen was losing her mind. She couldn't find us for anything because technically we weren't breaking the rules. Her rage built by the day, but that was just the warm-up. Phase 2. The Flamingo Uprising. With Karen on edge, it was time to escalate. One night, dozens of pink flamingos appeared on every lawn except mine. Lisa had 5 in a neat little row. Paul had a single flamingo saluting next to his flag. Even the old couple down the street, who never got involved in drama, put one right by their mailbox. It was an act of unity, an act of defiance. Karen snapped the next morning. She stormed up and down the street, screaming at everyone. "You think this is funny? You think this is cute?" No one answered. We all just watched from our windows, sipping our coffee, pretending not to notice her meltdown. Karen did what Karen does. She tried to report everyone. But here's the thing. She had no power over the board. She wasn't the HOA president. She was just the loudest, most obnoxious enforcer. And the board, they were starting to get sick of her too. But Karen wasn't done. She had one more move up her sleeve, the unexpected counterattack. HOA strikes back. That night, a new rule appeared in our HOA guidelines, effective immediately. All lawn decorations, including flamingos, garden gnomes, and decorative items, are strictly prohibited. She had banned everything, even her own garden gnomes. Karen was so desperate to win that she sacrificed her own yard. For the first time in history, Karen had gone too far. Even the most pro neighbors started turning on her. The neighborhood erupted in complaints, but Karen wasn't backing down. She doubled down, sending threatening letters to anyone who resisted. That's when we realized it was time for the nuclear option. It was time for Godzilla Phase 3, The Monster Awakens. I went online and ordered something so ridiculous, so over the top, that Karen wouldn't be able to comprehend it. A 20-foot-tall inflatable Godzilla. The plan was simple. We would install it overnight right in my front yard. A giant, unstoppable neon green kaiju standing in direct defiance of Karen's tyranny. A message, a warning. Karen wanted a war. This was war. And when she woke up the next morning, she would never be the same. The plan was set. The entire neighborhood was in on it. Everyone wanted to see Karen's reaction, and no one, not even the most HOA-loving residents, wanted to stop us. Karen had crossed the line, and now it was time for payback. At exactly 2 a.m., a small team of us gathered in my front yard, working in near silence under the dim glow of our porch lights. Paul brought an industrial-grade air pump, while Lisa and Mike stood watch at the end of the street, ensuring Karen wasn't lurking. The massive inflatable 20-foot Godzilla lay in a heap on my lawn, waiting to be unleashed. With a flip of the switch, the air pump roared to life, and the beast began to rise. At first, just a lump of wrinkled fabric, then a hulking form took shape, towering, monstrous, glowing green in the night. By the time we were done, Godzilla stood proudly in my yard, its massive claws outstretched toward Karen's house. Someone muttered, "This is the stupidest, most beautiful thing I've ever seen." I stepped back and admired our work. Godzilla was so big that the top of its head loomed over Karen's second-story window. If she so much as glanced outside, she would wake up to a nightmare. We exchanged grins, snapped a few pictures for evidence, and then dispersed before anyone could catch us. Now all that was left to do was wait. At 6:30 a.m., my security cameras captured the moment Karen stepped outside, coffee cup in hand, fully prepared to start her daily patrol of disappointment and power tripping. She looked up and froze for a solid 5 seconds. She didn't move. Then her coffee cup slipped from her hand, crashing onto the pavement. She stumbled back, pointing a shaking finger at the beast. Even through my security cam's audio, I could hear her screaming, What is this? What is this?" She staggered back into her house, vanished for about 30 seconds, then came sprinting back out, this time with her phone in hand. I got an alert that someone had called the HOA emergency line. Karen wasn't just mad. She was terrified. And that's when things took an even funnier turn. She called the police. 20 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up. I was standing on my porch, casually sipping my morning coffee, pretending to be just as surprised as anyone. The officer stepped out, took one look at Godzilla, then at Karen, then back at Godzilla. He sighed, "Ma'am, is this the emergency?" Karen was borderline hysterical. "It's a direct violation of HOA guidelines." She screeched, "It's intimidation. It's harassment." The officer rubbed his temples like he regretted every life choice that had led him to this moment. "Ma'am, it's a lawn decoration." Karen turned red. "It's a menace." The officer turned to me. "Sir, is there any actual crime happening here?" I shrugged, keeping a straight face. "I don't think so, officer. I just really love classic movie monsters." He gave me a tired look, sighed, and then turned back to Karen. "Ma'am, this is not a police matter." Karen sputtered, "But the HOA. Take it up with them," he said flatly before getting back in his car and driving off. I waved as he left. Karen, now completely livid, stomped back inside, presumably to draft the most unhinged HOA complaint in history. By noon, the HOA board had called an emergency meeting. I wasn't invited, but my inside sources, aka Paul and Mr. Thompson, kept me updated. Apparently, Karen demanded immediate action, but there was a problem. I had checked the HOA rules very carefully before doing this, and nowhere did it say inflatable decorations were banned. Karen tried everything. She ranted about neighborhood harmony, about how monstrosities like this would destroy property values. But one of the board members, clearly fed up with her antics, finally said, "Karen, you're the one who banned lawn decorations. We can't just make exceptions for you now." Karen looked like she was going to explode. She had trapped herself in her own rules. She had lost. For the first time in HOA history, Karen had no power. But just when I thought I had one, the HOA pulled a last-minute move that I didn't see coming. A notice was placed in my mailbox that afternoon. The HOA had called an official vote on whether I should be removed from the neighborhood. They were trying to kick me out. The war wasn't over yet. The letter sat in my hands like a bomb waiting to explode. The HOA wasn't just fining me anymore. They were trying to kick me out of my own neighborhood. I read it 3 times just to be sure. Due to repeated violations and failure to comply with HOA guidelines, a formal vote will be held to determine whether your membership in this community should be revoked. Translation: they wanted me gone. I could already see Karen's smug face in my head, probably celebrating with a victory cup of decaf tea. This was her final move, her checkmate. She knew she couldn't beat me fairly, so she was using the HOA itself as a weapon. She must have pressured the board into an emergency vote. If she got enough people on her side, I was out. I had to stop it. That night, the neighborhood resistance gathered again. Paul, Mr. Thompson, Lisa, Mike, and a few others sat in my living room, grim-faced. The mood was different now. Before, it had been about fun, about annoying Karen just enough to fight back. But now it was serious. "Let's be honest," Lisa said. "If Karen wins this vote, we're all next. She's just getting started." Mike nodded. "She won't stop until this place looks like one of those fake neighborhoods in dystopian movies." Mr. Thompson sipped his whiskey. Then we stopped. I exhaled. We had one chance. The vote was in 2 days. That meant we had 48 hours to convince the neighborhood that Karen was the real problem. I wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, we launched our counterattack. We went door to door, talking to every homeowner. I showed them Karen's pattern of abuse, her ridiculous fines, her selective enforcement, and the way she manipulated the HOA to push her own agenda. We weren't just making noise. Now we were rallying the neighborhood. The biggest weapon we had was Karen's own arrogance. People were tired of her. The Flamingo War had been funny at first, but now that she was using the HOA to evict people, that crossed a line. By the night before the vote, we had a full-blown rebellion on our hands, but we still didn't know if it was enough. Voting day arrived. The HOA meeting was held in the community center, a boring little beige building that somehow smelled like printer ink and crushed dreams. The place was packed. Half the neighborhood had shown up. Even people who had never cared about HOA politics were here for the drama. Karen sat at the front, arms crossed, smug as ever. The HOA president, a balding man in a sweater vest, cleared his throat. "All right, let's get started." Karen immediately stood. "Before we begin, I'd like to state the obvious. This neighborhood is falling apart because of one person. We've had a breakdown in order, harmony, and respect, and it's all because of him." She turned and pointed at me. I stood too. "Actually, I'd like to make a statement," I said, keeping my voice even. The HOA president sighed, but motioned for me to continue. I turned to the room. "Let's talk about what's really happening here," I said. "This isn't about lawn decorations. It's not even about HOA rules. It's about control. It's about one person using this board to force everyone to follow her personal preferences." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. I continued. "Karen doesn't want a community. She wants a dictatorship. She has fined families over wind chimes. She has threatened homeowners over Christmas lights. She called the police over a balloon, and now, when someone finally pushes back, she tries to kick them out." People nodded. I could see it, the shift. Karen's smug expression faltered. "That's not true. I've only been enforcing the rules." I pulled out printed emails, complaints from residents, and photos of her own violations. Proof that she had been bending the rules for herself while enforcing them on others. Then Mr. Thompson stood. "I'd like to add something," he said, stepping forward. He held up a printed document. I recognized it instantly. It was a financial audit of the HOA. Karen froze. "According to these records," Mr. Thompson said, "certain HOA funds have been misallocated." Whispers spread. Karen's face turned ghost white. She stammered, I don't know what you're talking about, but it was too late. We had proof." The HOA president frowned. "Karen, is this true?" Silence for the first time ever. Karen had nothing to say. The vote was called immediately. First item on the ballot, whether I should be removed. It wasn't even close. Over 90% voted against my removal. Karen had failed. Then came the second vote, a motion to remove Karen from the HOA board entirely. It passed unanimously. Karen stood up so fast her chair nearly tipped over. "You can't do this," she hissed, looking around, but no one backed her up. She had alienated everyone, and just like that, she was gone. Karen stormed out of the meeting, shoving past people on her way to the door. As soon as it slammed behind her, the room erupted in cheers. We had won, and Godzilla was here to stay. The neighborhood felt different the next morning. Lighter, freer, almost like the air itself had been cleansed of an invisible weight. Karen was gone. No more ridiculous fines, no more passive-aggressive letters, no more angry early morning patrols. For the first time in years, people actually enjoyed their homes. Neighbors who had barely spoken to each other before were now chatting on sidewalks, trading stories about their run-ins with Karen. Kids rode their bikes freely without fear of getting their parents fined. People even started decorating their yards again. My Godzilla stood proud and victorious, towering over the cul-de-sac as a monument to our rebellion. A week later, the new HOA leadership held their first meeting. It wasn't about enforcing rules. It was about undoing all the nonsense Karen had put in place. The Flamingo ban was repealed, the Christmas light restriction was gone, and the bike rule was completely erased. The neighborhood celebrated that night. Dozens of flamingos reappeared, not just on my lawn, but on nearly every yard in the neighborhood. A silent tribute, a sign that Karen had lost. But just when I thought it was over, just when I thought the HOA drama had finally ended, something happened that changed everything. 2 weeks later, I got a letter in the mail. At first, I thought it was a leftover violation notice, but when I opened it, my stomach dropped. It wasn't a fine, it was a policy change notice. A new HOA president had been elected, someone Karen had personally recruited before she was removed, and their first order of business, a new, stricter ban on all outdoor decorations. The letter ended with a single bolded line. This rule will be strictly enforced. I stared at the paper, then I looked outside at my 20-foot Godzilla, then back at the paper. I sighed. Oh, you got to be kidding me. This war wasn't over. It was just getting started.